Good morning. My name is Patty Judy. I am the Education Director at Pasadena Heritage, and it is my privilege to introduce to you our presenter for this morning. Anna Maria C. Whitaker is a Professor Emerita in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona, where her primary areas of teaching and research were in urban design, the history of world cities, particularly Europe and Latin America, diversity issues, and community participation. She holds a Master of Architecture from UC Berkeley and a Master in Urban Planning from UCLA. She was a former principal planner for the city of Pasadena for 10 years from 1979 to 1989. She also worked in other county and city agencies and as a planning consultant. Professor Whitaker received an Outstanding Site Visitor Award from the Planning Accreditation Board in 2019 after participating in 10 accreditation visits to urban planning programs around the country. She served in various American Planning Association and American Institute of Certified Planners committees and task forces, including the Los Angeles APA Board. Her research interests continue to focus on urban design, history of urban form in world cities, and social equity planning. Her current research projects involve historical preservation and diversity in the San Gabriel Valley, including a study of the women that built Pasadena, California, and women artists in Pasadena, and historic preservation and diversity in UNESCO World Heritage Cities in Latin America. As a volunteer in Pasadena Heritage, she served on the Pasadena Heritage Board and as chair of the Education Committee. Anna Maria's interest in Julia Morgan began when she was in school and realized that they had much in common. Both women, both from California, both architects, and both attended Berkeley. She's glad to see Julia Morgan getting attention and believes she deserves more credit and appreciation for the legacy that she has given to us. Thank you so much, Anna Maria.
Good morning. So nice to have you all sharing in this tribute to Julia Morgan. Very special as a Californian and as a woman. And I hope I can share with you some of the aspects of her experience that really build up the base and the framework for her to accomplish so much. Oh, going the wrong way here. There we go. Julia Morgan said, "Let my buildings speak for themselves." And I hope so some of the buildings you're going to see today give you a sense of speak to you as well, with a great variety of projects that she worked on. She is less known, regardless of one of the books that I'm going to refer to says, considering the amount of work and the importance of her work. I ask people often, do you know Julia Morgan? Many don't, but the ones that do usually connect her to Hearst Castle. And the reality is Hearst Castle, as mammoth project that was 26 years of involvement. It's just a small part of all the things she did. And I hope I can explain to her how her life experience helped her to achieve some of the wonderful things she did. She did not write about her architectural approach or very much. We do have a lot of letters that fortunately inform us about some of her opinions. And I think that's an area that still needs a lot of work, but we'll talk about that a little bit. She had a long and very prolific professional career. She surmounted incredible gender barriers, both at home and abroad. She is often called a quiet feminist. She did, rather than try to talk about it, but her example has inspired many of us because it's just amazing what she was able to accomplish. Before I get into the key dates in her life, I wanted to alert you. There are three books that particularly inspired this presentation. The first one was Sarah Boutel in 1994 book was the first one that really took a comprehensive look at her activities, and it has a wonderful list at the end of her projects that give us addresses and also by timeline. And apparently the list is not complete, but you will see still working. Some of the drawings of hers may have been lost, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. If you're interested in architecture and a little more detail on her wonderful buildings, I recommend that you look at Mark Wilson. There's two editions of this book. Julia Morgan, The Architect of Beauty. His wonderful photographs really illustrate the amount of detail she put in each one of her buildings. And I think that makes it quite special. Finally, Sarah Alabak, 2000 book, The First Women Architects, dedicates one chapter to Julia and is helpful in summarizing a lot of the things we're going through. Uh, Julia was born January 20, 1872 in San Francisco. Her parents have moved west, both from New England and New York, and his parents were Charles and Eliza Parmalee Morgan. She was the second of five children, and the family moved to Oakland because of the milder weather than San Francisco. And she grew up in a stick East Lake Victorian house. She was very close to two of her siblings, Emma and Avery. And I'll tell a little bit more about that. Avery was a constant companion, drove her to school in Berkeley for a year till she joined her sorority. She lived with her for a little bit in France and shared an apartment. And then she took care of him when he was ill until he died. The family was very important. And again, a great support of her work. We'll talk both her mother. It was kind of atypical for a Victorian home because she was not a professional woman, Eliza, but she encouraged both of the daughters to have professional lives. We know about Julia, and her sister was an attorney and Hastings Law School. She married an attorney and she actually maintained an office, although her practice was probably not quite as extensive as Julia was. She graduated from Oakland High School in 1890, and she died in 1957 in her apartment in San Francisco. She is buried with the family plot in Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland. There's no special monument. She shares a monument with all of the members of her family. And this is the list. I believe you probably got a list of books, more extensive, but these are the ones that we're talking about. Julia Morgan has a number of very important firsts in terms of what she did. She wanted to be an architect. There was no program quite available yet in California, so she decided to take an engineering degree at UC Berkeley. She graduated in 1894. Few women came before her. We are told in some publications that she was the second woman that graduated from the program. The program was important to her career for two things. First, she became an expert on so many ways of building that came very handy throughout her career. She also met her mentor and his teacher of drawing, Bernard Maybeck, and we'll talk about him a little bit more, but he was certainly influential in the kind of approach to architecture that he took. We'll talk about that a little bit more. She also, in the second year, joined a sorority, and the women's sorority often hire her to build houses around the Bay Area, and we're going to discuss those as well. Bernard Maybeck also had an informal architecture studio kind of thing, and she was part of that. All the others were, of course, male, but some of them are important to us in Pasadena. Bakewell and Brown built our beautiful city hall, and a number of the other members, but it's sort of built on her an interest in Why did she go into architecture? That's a question that often comes. Um, Apparently her cousin Lucien Barton was married to Pierre Lebrun, who was part of a family of architects very important in New York, and he was very encouraging to what she was doing and gave her, and in fact when he retired in 1910 she inherited all his books as well. But this experience was obviously not easy, but she was able to do it and graduate. Now, um, Maybeck has graduated from the Schools of Beaux Arts in Paris. That was the premier architecture school in the world, I think, at the time, and encouraged her to attend. She had to go through a number of stages, the process of getting accepted and eventually getting a certificate wasn't easy. In fact, she had to do it 3 times till finally she was able to do that. But in that school, she got two very important parts or her expertise. One was the learning about classical styles, so we're in vogue at the time, and continue to expand her drawing expertise. She actually was able to graduate in 1902, and she was the first female graduate of the Coles de Beaux Arts in Paris. She came back to California after she graduated. She stopped for a little bit in New York, but decided she wanted to go home. And she loved California, by the way, and promised that she wouldn't get homesick when she was in Paris in Europe. But she came back, and we were very happy she did. Um, she came back and worked for Maybeck as well as the planner and architect of UC Berkeley, and for a while. But after a few years, she decided she wanted to have her own firm after she actually got the license in California to be an architect in 1904. And she was, again, the first to do that. She ran her very successful firm for 42 years. She hired from 5 to 15 architects, and she very often hired women. In fact, the Sarah Alabak lists the names of a number of them. She encouraged some of them to get licensed as well. And her office was run very successfully, everybody agreed. And she was very supportive, very direct, but at the same time wanted everybody to work in the same scale that she did. The heart of her office was a library that gave you a lot of books on styles of architecture, which we will see are very important. Now, her first office was at her parents' house in Oakland. Then she opened one in San Francisco, Montgomery Street, with the 1906 earthquake hit San Francisco. She lost her office all the way to the last pencil, they said. So she decided to locate to this building, the Merchants Exchange Building, a 1903 building that survived the earthquake in California Street. And one of her reviewers mentioned that she really wanted to have a professional address. So it was no question that she was qualified to do this. Now, a lot of times she's referred as a client's architect because she was able to work for a number of people and try to reflect what they needed in their architecture. That doesn't mean that she was not clear in any way about the styles and what she wanted her. And I assume she used persuasion quite often to convince her clients, but she was sensitive to what her clients needed. She had over 700 projects covering both institutional, commercial, and residential uses, which is an incredible number of projects throughout her career. No project was too small. She was willing to work on it. And she work projects in 47 California cities and communities. That's one of the great gifts she gave us. We actually can go and see her buildings. Some have been demolished, and in fact, the list from Boutel's book show which ones have been demolished. There's probably a few more, but there's still a lot of them around, and some are certainly very important to us as part of our cultural heritage. Now, this is just a little idea of what she was working on at the time that our YWCA in Pasadena was being designed. She has several institutional buildings, two churches, a neighborhood house community center in San Francisco. She worked in Honolulu, converting a residence to a dorm, and she designed a monument in Colma. Um, Julia Fisher Antique Shop was built in Oakland. Was demolished. And then she had several residential projects, and she was just starting to work on the Hearst project as well. As you can see, very, very busy. And it varies from 5 to 15 draftsmen and assistants. However, it seems like she keep a pretty tight hold in each one of her projects and work well. She worked well with architects, craftsmen, and we'll see throughout her projects. Now, some people said that there is not one kind of building for Julia Morgan. And I'm going to submit to you that, in fact, she has a different kind of design approach that was shared with Bernard Maybeck, which is what we recognize as the first Bay tradition. And this is her way of approaching buildings. Each building is unique. And she took each project by itself, no matter how small or how big, tried to put her stamp on that. The buildings are integrated into the environment. And that's particularly notable in all the houses she built in Berkeley Hills. And I think very clearly, very sensitive to that light and number. She used natural materials. And of course, used historic motifs, which she was an expert. But all of her buildings took advantage of new modern building materials and techniques, and we'll see a few examples of that. Now, Mark Wilson, on the second edition of his book, talks about how this First Bay tradition is also very sensitive to sustainable developments. Again, we don't often give credit that they were architects that were thinking about sustainable building with some sensitivity on the land as well. This is St. John, Berkeley. This is now the Julia Morgan Center for the Arts, and it's being remodeled inside, but you will see the facade a little bit later on. Something interesting happened. I mentioned before in 1906, there was a earthquake. And I think in a way, California gave Julia Morgan kind of an opportunity. This hotel, very much loved by the elite of San Francisco, was destroyed during the earthquake. Several architects were asked if they would rebuild. They didn't want to do that. They approached Julia and she took it on. And I thought that was an incredible courageous event to approach to. It was done in a year, and this is still in San Francisco, in Nob Hill, very important hotel in the area. But that opens a lot of doors for her. A lot of the people that use the hotel hired her, and it was a great way to get visibility in a city with people and resources. Another very important element on the development of her career is that women organizations were starting to come into their own. They wanted their own facilities and they wanted to hire women architects. And this is a picture of the Studio Club in Hollywood, which we will see in a little while. And we would see it was from the Los Angeles Public Library photos. It reads Mrs. Cecil B. DeMille, a number of very important um, women in related to the industry were part of the people that raised the money to create the space for women that came to be actors in California, a place to live until, and we'll talk a little bit when we get there. But she actually did 20 YW buildings in California, Hawaii, Utah, and Arizona. And we'll see some of them. Some of them are now different uses, but we still have a nice collection to see and follow. Another source of support for Julia and being able to do so many was institutional projects that for one reason supported. Susan Mills was the president of Mills College in Oakland, and she hired her. And this also illustrates to do a campanile first in 1903, but the list here shows you that she seemed to have kept good relations with all her clients because she was hired over and over again in many of her large projects to come back and do. Here, she used reinforced concrete. It was kind of mission inspired, but it's a completely different kind of language, I think, for a campanile, which is a traditional element in campus. In addition to that, she built a library, a gymnasium, infirmary, and Julia Morgan was known. Some of you that had an opportunity to visit her castle know her famous pools, but she did a number of pools, and apparently it was something she really liked to design. And she also did a recreation center there. The Hearst connection was, again, very, very important for her career and gave her access to a number of projects. Apparently, Mrs. Phoebe Hearst, which is a woman in her own right with incredible credits to her name in California. She was not born in California, but she supported us in a variety of ways. Had met and heard about her in her work in the UC Berkeley engineering degree. She went to France, Paris, to meet with Julia and offer financial assistance. Julia had money from her parents, but was running pretty low and she never wanted to ask for help. She refused the economic support from hers, but established a good connection with her. And so when Julia came back, she was asked first to develop a Hacienda del Pozo de Verona, a Pleasanton compound from the Hearst family, Spanish colonial. And then Mrs. Hearst really encouraged Asilomar, essentially a conference center to be built by Julia. And again, you can see that she was involved in a number of buildings in the facility. Asilomar is still available as a conference center and can be visited, although it has a number of new buildings. They were very sensitive to her original development. The interiors of the administration building are truly remarkable. Sorry, I don't have a picture here. But she, again, followed First Bay tradition, what we would call very craftsman-like use of materials and sitting well in the site as well. Her YWCA buildings give us a whole range of styles, type of, and this is one of certainly my favorite, one not the after Pasadena, of course. This is the one in Oakland, which is still kept. There is a sign in the front that says dedicated to noble womanhood. It was built in 1913 to 1915. And it's an Italian Renaissance, a very classical facade, dividing the facade, symmetry, a cornice on top. When you enter the building, has this wonderful atrium with a lot of natural light, but it's just really one of the many examples of different architectures that she used. On the other side of the issue, this was the San Francisco Chinese WYCA, which is today this Chinese Historical Society of America, so we can visit it. And she was very skilled in using new materials, but at the same time incorporate a number of Chinese architectural motives that you can see. The Berkeley Women's City Club is one of the most well-known and most well-regarded buildings that she built. It's a tower with two wings, um, and it uses a number of medieval motifs that came later in her career. But again, a women's group that used her talent to create something very special. This is the Studio Club in Hollywood, Los Angeles. We have several, and I will mention that there is one book about, let's see if I have the name correctly. Hope I do. Go back to Antonio Gonzalez wrote a book about architects in Southern California and have a chapter on her work. And he told us a little, it's kind of interesting to read. Several of her projects are described with a little bit more of Los Angeles information, who was there. As I mentioned before, this building was supported by a number of prominent women in the movie industry, and was served as a housing for um, female actors and artists that came to Los Angeles and needed a place to stay. Has a number of rooms and is very classical Spanish colonial. She actually described this in an interview, which is unusual for her, and talk about other styles besides Spanish colonial that she worked into this Hollywood Studio Club, built in 1925 to 1926. Some of the famous people that lived there include Kim Novak, Marilyn Monroe, and the writer Anne Ryan as well. But there's a long list of famous people, both supporting the building and the idea was to provide a place for women that came to work in the industry that was safe and in the middle of the action. Another, I don't know why this is here, of the YW that was converted in 1929. She built one for Riverside. And this is now the Riverside Art Museum, so it can be visited. Certainly a local gem and a California treasure. Beautiful Mediterranean styles in the facade, as you can see, and a lot of detailing. And you can see some information as well on the museum website. Now, the connection to Hearst was very, very important in her career again, and it lasted for many years. I assume he wasn't easy to work for, but she seemed to have be able to communicate with him and do. And we're going to talk about a few of the buildings she helped build. William Hearst wanted a building for one of his 5 newspapers, the Los Angeles Examiner, and hired her to do a building at the encouragement of his mother in 1913 to 15. She worked with 2 other architects, which she often did, which she worked away from San Francisco, although she always kept a very tight rein. The building is Mission Revival, Moorish details throughout. The interiors are absolutely fantastic. The paper unfortunately closed in 1889, and it had been empty for a long time. The Hearst family owns the property and apparently found a partner later in the last few years to be able to remodel the inside. The building was supposed to open as a mixed-use project in spring of 2020. I have not heard that had moved. Again, with all our current situation. But the exciting thing is that the building facade is being preserved, and many of the wonderful places inside were as well. And okay. Hearst Castle is probably familiar to many of you. It's a big tourist attraction in the central coast of California. And Julia was involved with this building from 1922 to 1948. Um, and originally, Mr. Hearst wanted to build a big house and three satellite houses. It grew and it grew. And one of the reasons why it grew so much is he liked to buy whole rooms, artifacts, and a number of things from Europe, bring them here, and Julia had to accommodate that within the structure. There's two pools in the facility. As I mentioned, the pool was expanded several times. It's an interior pool. And the house itself, as you can see, very large, 68,000, 38 bedrooms, 42, and he used to do a lot of entertaining. Now, apparently, Julia took a train on Friday, came to work in the project, and then went back to work on Monday in San Francisco. She kept that connection for many, many years, and it's very interesting to see how she added detail to so many different kinds of. The building is called the Cuesta Encantada, and well, we know it more often as the Hearst Castle. Another project that Mr. Hearst, his mother had planned to build a number of buildings in the campus where she had been the first woman Board of Regents member. And she died in 1919 as impacted by the influence of 1918. And the project was left undone. And Mr. Hearst, hired uh, both Julia and Bernard Maybeck to work in the gymnasium. And it was a very typical Beaux-Arts. It's not really clear how much of this is done by Julia and how much by Maybeck. However, we know that those enormous urns were designed by Julia. And the building is still in the campus, certainly a prominent space as well. She had planned to have several other buildings built with this, and they were never done. Now, this is kind of a fantasy that not too many people know about it. Mrs. Hearst had this property, added to this property, and had a castle built on it. The castle eventually burned. But Mr. Hearst decided to rebuild some of the buildings, and he hired Maybeck and Julia Morgan to do a plan for this. But at the time, it was very close to the tight economic times. And so he decided not to spend as much money and instead hire Julia to do a simpler plan. Not really simple. It's a Bavarian village in an area that is very hard to get to near Mount Shasta, right by the McCloud River, taking advantage of the natural setting. There are 16 buildings there that are still in the site, except for one that have a fire. It's interesting that the buildings were decorated by murals that many people think that they look a little bit like Disney. The use of color. This place is not open to the public, I believe still owned by the Hearst family. And it's very hard to get to, but it sounds like a very incredible. Her plan, by the way, was very much of a classical Beaux-Arts plan. Now, going back to more regular uses, Fred Turner was a very big supporter. I believe she did several projects, but this one is still in operation right on College Avenue. And it's stores and apartments and very well kept. And they're certainly symmetrical, kind of Renaissance. I mean, it has some really interesting details. Look a little bit like the De La Robbia wreaths that we are so familiar with. Um, By the way, College Avenue is kind of a wonderful street, not just of Julia, but also of Maybeck, going all the way to the campus, and well visiting if you are in Oakland. Churches, she built several. I already mentioned St. John, and I show you an old photograph of the interior. This is now the Julia Morgan Center for the Arts. Very first Bay tradition, use of natural materials, very simple, symmetrical facade, but with a lot of detail. United Church in Oakland was much more of an arts and crafts with tutors, and that was done in 1917. Right across from the cemetery where she's buried, she built a Chapel of the Chimes mortuary, beautiful detailed building. She also worked with a couple of architects, but used a variety of elements from Romanesque and Gothic architecture and used them throughout a very large. And the building was built again over several times, and parts of them were added to it. The residential projects of Julia Morgan are amazing, but there's over 500 of them, and it's almost impossible. So I will just give you a short uh, glance at some of them. This I like this drawing because it shows you a house in Berkeley where she built so many of them, 1913, and very carefully using the slope and has some prairie overtones the way she designed. They are I didn't mention this before, but her drawings, what we have, are kept in my sister's school, San Luis Obispo. There's some plans kept in two archives in Berkeley, some in Stanford as well. And so there was a comment that when she closed her practice, she actually destroy a lot of her buildings. First of all, she sent it to her, contacted all her clients and asked if they were interested on the drawings. So the drawings were kept. And the ones that were not were kept by her secretary, who eventually make those available too. By the way, Battelle papers are also kept in San Luis Obispo. And if you go to the online archive of California, you can see not only some of the drawings and photos, but also a lot of her letters, which are also revealing since we know so little of the private Julia Morgan. This is just give you a range of the buildings that she worked on. The Colby House, very early in her career, is in Berkeley, 1905, and follow very much her first Bay tradition um, approach to buildings, a city landmark. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the William House, very elegant Italian Renaissance revival in Berkeley, 1928. So within that, there are many, many different houses throughout. A few years back, I have an opportunity and very, very helpful husband that took me around to see a number of her buildings throughout California. And this was kind of a little surprise to me. And I hope I can share with you what I felt when I saw this. It's a small building. There was a shop and a house for Jules Supo. Jules Supo was a wood carver from Switzerland that worked with her very closely in a number of her projects. And it takes a while to look at it because there was a lot of detail, but essentially this was a calling card. He didn't want to be away from his family doing the belong projects that he did for hers. So he wanted a house, a place to work and a house for them to live in. And she designed this for him. There's a lot of carvings. It's no better calling card for him. As you can see, the supports for the balcony, the decorations, the moldings. On top of each door, one of them talks about Jules Supo being able to do furniture in order. It's a 1925 project on Polk Street. Somewhat classical Renaissance revival, but I think it just gives you a sense of the detail that went to her buildings, small and large, and very respectful. Her buildings were practical, but she also have a little bit of the whimsical in them, I think. And as it is, it's kind of hard to see. That's not as good a picture from me, but the carving on top of the door. What is her legacy? Many of her properties are properties that have been designated the local and the state and the national register level. She did get recognition from UC Berkeley in 1929, and McNeil, one of the authors that prepared an article on her, said that she must have been surprised that she got so many credit from the university. In 2008, she was inducted in the California Hall of Fame. And finally, in 2014, a number of women pushed for her to receive a gold medal from the American Institute of Architects. It wasn't easy, but they were able to do it. I think of Julia very much as a California architect that really brought all her great attributes because he was very talented and used her different experiences to build a career that was quite astonishing. At that time, it will be astonishing today too. And this is a poster for a play called Becoming Julia Morgan that was played done in 2012 in Berkeley and South Solito. And it's just a poster of her work. But I think her legacy lives on, and we hope that we learn more about the way she felt about a number of her projects. But I think, as I said before, having her buildings around us is quite a treasure. And I encourage you to go visit wherever you are, if you come to California or if you're here, since she had a number of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna Maria. At this time, we're going to bring back Bob Kraft. He's got a few questions to get us started. And for the rest of you, the chat room is open. If you have some questions, go ahead and put them there. And I'll see for a few minutes, we'll engage in some of those questions before we move on to our Executive Director, Sue Mossman, to talk about our YWCA here. So, Bob, I leave it to you.
Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. It was very informative. Enjoyed it a lot. I wanted to, the first question I wanted to ask you is that Julia Morgan was a very private person, as you mentioned, and we don't know a lot about her personal life, a little, dribs and drabs we get from her letters. So I guess my question to you is, as someone who knows a lot about her and has written extensively on her, if you could ask her any question you wanted to, what would you ask her?
Oh, that's a hard question. I will ask her what her favorite building was, but I really believe that she would tell me that each one of her buildings were her favorite. And because she put enough detail and really believed that each building is standard on its own. I probably would like to ask her also what was her most difficult project. And I have to believe that it was the Hearst Castle because she worked on it and took, I'm sure, a lot of patience and dedication that she had for all her projects to spend 26 years working on that one project and having changes constantly. Apparently, Mr. Hearst changed his mind often, added stuff, but she was able to work on that, continue to do. So that would be my thoughts on that.
From what you've read and know about Julia Morgan, where did this interior strength come? Was it from her mother and her grandmother, who both had great strength? What are your thoughts there?
I think her mother was instrumental, as we were told. She didn't raise a traditional Victorian girl. She allowed them to follow her career for her and her sister. Her grandmother provided a lot of financial support, but I thought her whole family really support her. Her father may have not been successful in some of his, he came west hoping to benefit from mining. He didn't, but I think he also got support. And of course, she got a lot of support from Pierre Lebrun, the husband of her cousin. So she had really a very strong supported family support, which makes a big difference. And her own determination. There's a part of that, all that, that is her, that was able to put up with so many obstacles and still follow through and finish.
Um, the architect, Bernard Maybeck, was very impressed with Julia's talent and encouraged her to continue her studies at the École de Beaux-Arts in Paris. She she she, uh, she applied as you mentioned 3 times to get into school. She had a lot of grit and determination. Um, where are there other examples of her determination against all odds where she kept fighting?
I think probably the best example is her working to rebuild a Fairmont Hotel right after the earthquake. She got it done in a year, a project that most architects did not want to take. I think that took a lot of courage and grit to get it done, but she did and used new techniques to make the building safer during an earthquake, like we definitely need in our area. And I thought that was important. The other is the one I mentioned before, working through the Hearst projects seemed to me complicated by all means. She ran a very efficient office, I'm told, and I think make sure that everybody. But it took courage to get into some of the projects she did. I think, in addition to her many skills.
Um, One other question I want to ask. Julia Morgan was very fortuitous in many of the things that happened in her life or enabled things to happen in her life. The year before she applied to the École de Beaux-Arts, there was a group of women who were very politically active, and together they forced the school to admit women. She referred to them as the Bohemians. Do you know much about this group, or can you talk at all about it? They seem to be pretty powerful, and they did influence her a lot.
I don't think by the time that Julia got to Paris, she had already realized that women had not, it was difficult to get an engineering degree. I'm sure she knew about it. She knew that she needed support from different. I'm not aware of her relationship to the group. I know that going through the process, she went going through different studio, preparing projects to present, and going through the rejections 3 times must have been really hard. How much she joined, but she had, again, the sorority was important. It brought customers, clients afterwards. I don't know directly how she related to the group, but I think she came with an understanding that as a woman, she would have to put up with a lot of things. And that's what she did.
Hmm, thank you.
Wow, women
Kathy?
putting up with a lot of things. Where have I heard that before? We do have a couple of questions here in the chat for you, Anna Maria. Thank you, Bob. Um, One person's asking, where did Julia reside during all these times during her career?
Um, she lived with her parents at first in Oakland, and then she died in an apartment in San Francisco. I didn't talk very much about the end of her life, and I should have done that. But she closed her office in 1950 and had planned to do other things. Unfortunately, she went to Berkeley. Was mugged and hurt. And so she, after that, became very much a recluse in her apartment in Berkeley. Her secretary was very instrumental in helping her do the last period. She also had been in a cruise and missed the boat, and she felt that her faculties were being impacted. A woman that had to have control over things, I think that was probably very hard. I don't know in between. I should have had that other places, but I know she lied in San Francisco in her own apartment. And the building is still in San Francisco, as a matter of fact.
And could you remind us again, where did you say that people could see the Julia Morgan letters?
Yes, if you go to the online archive of California, there's a list from these organizations that have her materials. San Luis Obispo, CSU, San Luis Obispo. I think they have the bankrupt letters, but there is, for example, letters of her with to her husband's, her cousin's husband, which are very influential. She described to him, for example, the effects of the earthquake in 1906 in San Francisco. So there's a lot of stuff like that, but they're kept in there from the sources that we have. I get the feeling that, by the way, there's a new book coming in the fall from a woman that is the historian for Hearst Castle that talks more about more of a private portrait. It will come in the fall, and I'm looking forward to that. Maybe we'll get, because maybe Hearst had a lot of materials from those early. There's several publications. If you have that in the bibliography of her letters with Hearst, letters with some of the contractors. She worked very well, not only with other architects, but also with a lot of craftsmen. As I mentioned, she built the one house, but there were so many skills that were needed to do her castle. And she was able to work and understood and supervise it. Apparently she had contractors in her castle, but at some point she took over and actually supervised a lot of those people working in. It must have been a very complicated process to get all the skills coming together.
Yeah. Thank you. And finally, Frank R. is asking, are you familiar with their restoration project of the North Star House in Grass Valley, which was one of Julia's first residential projects, finished in 1905?
No, I'm not familiar, but I'm glad to hear that it's going. Again, her buildings are all around us. I mentioned College Avenue. I used to drive that street every day to go from Oakland to this UC campus when I was working on my first master. And I don't think I knew all the buildings. We can have signs all along the street indicating her buildings, but her houses deserve attention. I couldn't give as much because there's so many of them.
Yeah. Well, Frank, keep us informed of what you're doing so that we can keep up with that restoration project. And thank you for that. And one more time, who's the author of the new book that you were just mentioning?
The one that coming in the fall.
In the fall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's a historian. I wrote it down somewhere in here.
Well, and we'll be sending the bibliography out on Monday when we send the link to the.
I don't have that in the bibliography because I haven't seen it. But it's Victoria Kastner. She is the historian for the Hearst Castle, and it's an intimate portrait of a tail-bracing architect. And I think it might give us some clues or some additional information we don't have. It's supposed to come in the fall. It's already listed in Amazon. So
terrific. Well, Anna Maria, I want to thank you for this portion of our program, an introduction to Julia Morgan, our tribute to Julia Morgan. We are going to transition now and introduce our Executive Director of Pasadena Heritage, Sue Mossman, who's going to give us an update on our connection to Julia Morgan with an update on what's going on with the YWCA in Pasadena. So,
thank you to all the wonderful staff at Pasadena Heritage and celebrating her life and celebrating women's history. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, Sue Mossman.
And here I am, never in very good lighting, but that's fine. I think it's more important for me to just briefly give you a little bit of information about our Julia Morgan building in Pasadena. But first, I want to join in thanking Anna Maria for such a wonderful presentation and being reminded what an amazing person Julia Morgan was and how prolific and how well trained she was to bring all those talents to the many buildings that she built. So, how lucky we are to have a Julia Morgan building in Pasadena. And in many ways, I have to say how sad it is that it has undergone such difficult times over the last 20 years. I'm just going to touch a little bit on that history. But very personally, I would say this building, our former YWCA, is one of my favorite Pasadena buildings because it was designed by a woman, because it was in the Civic Center area before it was the Civic Center. And what an amazing connection to realize that Julia Morgan was trained at L'École des Beaux-Arts, and that the Beaux-Arts design and planning tradition really guided the creation of the Bennett Plan, which became our Civic Center. And this Julia Morgan building of ours predated all of that. A relatively simple building, but so elegant in its design and craftsmanship, and something that we really should treasure. And I hope we'll be able to visit again before too long and really enjoy. I also wanted to just set the time frame. Our YWCA was built between 1921 and 23, right about the time Julia Morgan was beginning to work for Hearst. So she did continue to work and had a particular affinity, as Anna Maria said, for buildings related to women's organizations, women's schools and colleges, and our YWCA here in Pasadena fits right within that pattern and that love of Julia Morgan's to relate to the importance of women's organizations and education in her career. Pasadena Heritage has been involved and concerned with this building ever since our founding, really. It was in the early 1980s that the YWCA began to consider leaving this building because it had become rather a burden to it as an organization. Its mission was not to maintain a large historic building that was aging and needed updating. And the YWCA organization felt that they should consider selling this building and moving to simpler headquarters and devoting themselves to their own mission. At one point, we worked with them trying to find grant funding or assistance for them to repair the boiler in the basement and the roof and a few other things, but we were not successful together. The YMCA at one point offered to partner with or buy out the YWCA. Here you're seeing the dining room soon after the YWCA was fully occupied with all these wonderful women enjoying, I think, lunch together. And you can see the structure inside the building, while simple, very elegantly designed with that repeated arch pattern. I love seeing these windows on the right side of the screen with their transoms open to let some fresh air into the dining room. And it's our hope that this dining room will come back into being, perhaps as a restaurant or a coffee shop in the not too distant future. But just trying to condense my thoughts here for you. Ultimately, the YWCA did sell the building. An architect, a woman architect, purchased the building, and we were all so hopeful And she seemed so interested in restoring and bringing the building back. But due to other pressures in her life, she did not move forward with those plans. And ultimately, the building was falling into disrepair. It was not being taken good care of. And we began to urge the city to take the building over, ultimately through eminent domain. And that actually happened in 2011. And soon after the city became the owners of the building, Pasadena Heritage hosted a workshop with lectures by Anna Maria and Jennifer Trotu about Julia Morgan, and then tours inside the building, because now it would be the city's opportunity to take this building on, bring it back to life, and find a new use for it. So these are all the people waiting in line to visit the building on that day that we had it open. And you'll see when there are a couple pictures coming up here of how the building looked 10 years ago when we were inside visiting these spaces, and just barely at the top, we're in the gym here. You can see that exposed truss work, which Anna Maria showed in a number of her slides. I think that is a hallmark of Julia Morgan's approach to architecture, to reveal the structure. And maybe it was her training as an engineer that made her love the intricacy and the stability of seeing truss work and structure within a big open space like this. And as an engineer, she knew how to have buildings built that would be structurally sound and well supported. As a young mom, I used to come here and put my children in the daycare center next door to the gym so I could come and exercise in here. And I remember lying on the floor and looking up at that truss work and always being inspired by its strength to work a little harder on all those sit-ups. Eventually, an RFP was issued for new uses for the building. Many suggestions had been made. Inventories and studies of the building's structure and needs. And you can see here, it was already beginning to fall into some disrepair, but lots of wonderful detail was intact within the building. Ultimately, a hotel project was chosen, the Kimpton firm, and for several years, negotiations continued on the Kimpton project until the proposers came back and came back and came back asking for more concessions. This is the swimming pool. A favorite of Julia Morgan to design swimming pools. Ours is very simple, but you don't see the skylight above that brings natural light into the pool. When it was full, it was quite a sight to behold. Anyway, the Kimpton project eventually was shut down because the city walked away after the developer could not put together a feasible plan that fit within the city's program. And again, we were back in limbo on this building. Unfortunately, during that time, there were roof leaks in the building. It was not well secured. People were living in the building, lighting cooking fires within the building, adding graffiti on many of these walls and doing real damage. Here's some more detail of those great trusses and the strapping there that's just, to me, so dramatic and energetic. All of these spaces suffered serious decline. There was a Civic Center task force created to start the project over. And you can see here some of the damage with roof ceiling failing upstairs here and falling on the floor. A lot of water damage that was so unfortunate and frustrating. And although many of the windows were boarded up, many were broken. But finally, the city better secured the building while it started over in the process. Today, we have two new projects under consideration for the Civic Center. Both here again, you can see the boarding having been removed from the windows so that we could have enough light when we went in to take a look at current conditions, which were heartbreaking. The building, as I said, was fenced. The roof was covered. I think major damage is at least on hold for now. And there are two new projects proposed for the Civic Center after a second round of responses to an RFP, request for proposals. On the north side of Holly Street will be an affordable housing project on the property known as the Water and Power Site. And the YWCA portion of the Civic Center on the south side of Holly Street. Again, proposers, all of them came in with hotel projects. And the reason being that of all the potential uses for our former YWCA, a hotel project could actually generate enough revenue to make what is now a $13 to $15 million rehabilitation project possible for the YWCA, former YWCA, to be brought back, rehabilitated and restored, and become part of a new usable building with a new life. Just wrapping up, I would say there's been much controversy about the extension of the YWCA property to include a hotel and a new building on the east side facing City Hall, which would contain many of the hotel rooms. The YWCA building would contain the public spaces, the lobby, hopefully a restaurant. We look forward to the courtyard being restored and reused as part of the project. But building a new building on the open space, which has now been there since City Hall was built, has been a concern to a number of open space advocates who championed keeping all of the green space, not building on it at all. But Pasadena Heritage supports the fact that the Bennett plan for the Civic Center calls for new buildings to be built facing City Hall. And a compromise that leaves some green space but allows for a new building is the proposal that was responded to and addressed by the hoteliers planning now for a future for the building. They are called HRI. They are out of New Orleans, and they've done a number of other smaller hotels that include historic buildings. And our goal as Pasadena Heritage at this point is to see new buildings in the Civic Center that become respectful parts of our beautiful city, beautiful Civic Center. Respect this wonderful YWCA building in its elegant simplicity, but are also proper additions to the civic heart of our city. And we have the same expectations for the new affordable housing project on the north side of Holly Street that will also face City Hall. These need to be magnificent, dignified, well-crafted, beautifully built buildings. And the uses will bring new activity and vibrancy to the Civic Center. And there will be green space comforting them and facing City Hall as well. So I think there is an opportunity here, but we need to stay vigorously involved to make sure that we get what we expect and what Pasadena deserves and what our Julia Morgan building deserves in the end. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to try to answer any questions, but also I know we need to wrap up our program and let you go out and enjoy this gorgeous Saturday morning.
If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat. Any questions for Sue this morning? I just have a thank you for our wonderful program. That's always nice to hear as well in the chat.
I always think when there are no questions, either I put you all to sleep or I was so brilliant that I answered them all in my rapid fire presentation. And we'll be doing more to provide information to you after today's program, including perhaps an outline. And please follow our e-news, become a member, and hear from us often because we will need your help to be sure that the right things happen for this Julia Morgan building. After 38 years of working on this, I swear we need to have this building treated properly and come back to life for all of us.
Okay. People are grateful for the update and thank us for our work on all of this. So that's wonderful. So I think without anything else, let's see. I'm going to share our final slides with you, which are, we want to thank you for attending and supporting our virtual programs. We still have more coming. We still are not sure when we'll be able to be in person. We're hoping it's soon. There's a little bit of light at the end of this tunnel. But for now, we're still doing some virtual programs. And if you are not a member, we encourage you to join us so that you can get all of these updates that Sue was just talking about. And also want to let you know about some of our upcoming events. I get the privilege on March 24th to give a Julia Morgan mini presentation because not only is this month Women's History Month, but it is also Developmental Disability Awareness Month. And I'll get to give a presentation for the special day class at Marshall Fundamental School. Then on March 27th, we have our Women's History Month quarantine crawl, virtual happy hour, and Pasadena trivia. And yes, the focus of that Pasadena trivia is going to be on Pasadena women. So you're going to want to join that. That'll be a lot of fun. Spring home tour this year, I'm very excited about. It's going to be a 3-part spring home tour. 2 houses featured every month in April, May, and June. We've already confirmed some Wallace Neff houses, Conrad Buff, Don Hensman, David Whitmer, and Loyal Watson. So please look forward to more information about that and join us. And we are just so happy to have you here with us each and every time we do these. And thank you for coming. With that, have a good weekend.
Bye, everybody.